Tonight, Benson has a madcap mystery on his hands when vandals cause chaos in the mansion. And on I'm a Big Girl Now, Diana goes undercover in a dry cleaners to wipe out a protection racket. Now stay tuned for One Life to Live, following an ABC News Brief next.
An ABC News Brief brought to you by Frigidaire. Now, Joe Templeton.
Good afternoon. The Space Shuttle launch has been postponed again. The countdown was stopped just 16 minutes before liftoff this morning because of problems with the computer. About 3 hours later, officials removed the crew and rescheduled the launch for 6:50 Eastern Time Sunday morning. Doctors at George Washington University Hospital plan to release President Reagan this weekend. The release could come as early as Saturday morning, but the final decision won't be made until the president has given another thorough examination. Now this.
In the last 15 years, I've had 3 cars,
6 transmissions,
and 1 refrigerator.
a Frigidaire.
Frigidaire. Here today, here tomorrow.
Mount St. Helens blew ash and steam 15,000 feet high today in what scientists described as a minor eruption. The nuclear submarine George Washington suffered minor damage when it collided with a Japanese freighter in the East China Sea yesterday. The freighter sank. 2 Japanese crewmen are missing. That's News Brief. More on the ABC World News.
The more you go to and nothing helped. And now they're trying to find out what it is, and I don't think they've discovered that answer yet.
Did you have any kind of a chance at all to be near the spacecraft, Frank, when the astronauts finally came off board?
No, we were not allowed that close. We were kept back in this press area. From where you see it, we're about, almost 3 miles away, and that's about the closest we could get. You have all that toxic material that's being pumped in and out, and there are all kinds of dangers, so we were not anywhere near it. And also the astronauts are kept in seclusion during this period. They're kept away from all the press and everyone except the folks who were involved directly in the shot.
It's a bizarre scene. We switched down to you live yesterday, and it was just a pandemonium of activity going on. Can the cameraman widen out any wider than he is? There is absolutely nothing moving except the top of the water.
Well, the only other thing we see,
birds.
We got the birds out there. This parking lot was absolutely jammed. We had Hollywood stars out here. We had governors. Way off there, you couldn't see the water practically. We had cameras. 3,000 newsmen were down here. We had cameras lining the entire shoreline right where that flagpole is. You could scarcely find room to sit on that green. It was just an incredible amount of people that were here. And we all started coming down here. I didn't get to bed last night. We haven't slept for 2 days here. We started out at 2 a.m. this morning, and a 20-minute drive took us close to 2 hours. So it was quite a sight, and this is just as incredible. I just don't see anyone around inside. I see one of our competitors at a truck. Jules Bergman is doing a stand-up over there at the AM Multigraphics, but I won't help him. I'll let him work on his own.
You said you haven't slept for 2 days, Frank. Of course, we will assume that you've been working all that time, and we thank you very much.
Of course, Jack.
We thank you very much for your report.
Jack, I'm on a roll. Don't leave me now.
Well, we have to move along here.
No, this is
Frank.
where the fun is.
Yeah, no, Cliff wants his full time, even though you're not here. He's demanding he wants the full 3 minutes at the end of the hour. So we're going to have to let you go.
Okay.
All right. Kind of incredible, in a way, a space shot that has captured the entire world's attention, a snag developed early this morning.
We have had a determination to scrub the launch attempt for today. The next step...
This is News 4 New York. With Chuck Scarborough and John Hambrick.
Good evening, I'm Sue Simmons, sitting in for John Hambrick, who's on vacation.
Well, today was to have been the dawn of a new era in American space exploration. Maybe Sunday morning, if NASA technicians can figure out what went haywire in the space shuttle's electronic brain. Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen were certainly cheery as they boarded Columbia early today, unaware they'd spend the next 6 hours strapped in their seats, bedeviled by a renegade computer. After 2.5 years of delays, this spaceship, the most complex vehicle of any kind man has ever built, managed to once again disappoint all associated with it and the hundreds of thousands of people who've gathered at Cape Canaveral for the launch, and, of course, the millions watching on television. Frank Field's among those at the launch sites.
The console at the Houston Space Center lit up like a Christmas tree when the important backup computer went haywire. In the cockpit of the Columbia, there was a warning. That was the beginning of a problem that the space experts could not solve.
The launch director, George Page, and Center Director Dick Smith have just announced that we will scrub the launch attempt for today.
John Yardley of NASA put it succinctly. I mentioned it yesterday. The things you want to be careful about are the unknowns. Problems that never happened before. Problems that people never thought of. Well, today at the NASA press conference, the data processing engineers faced their gremlin.
Obviously, I was hoping to come over here about this time today and talk to you about being on orbit. I'm sure all of you have followed what's gone on this morning. We had an anomaly at the Cape. During the countdown, it would not allow us to launch, and basically the problem was inability of one of our computing systems to talk to another one, which is a requirement.
Until that problem is solved, why the computer failed, the Columbia spaceship cannot be launched. When the announcement that the flight was scrubbed came at 10 a.m., there was disappointment. For many, it was their only chance to witness a manned space launch, the first in 9 years. Others were ready to wait it out. And so back to hotels, motels, and apartments they went to wait for NASA's next announcement.
And Dr. Frank Field is going to stay at Cape Canaveral all weekend. He'll bring us reports both tomorrow and Sunday.
Well, Chuck, meantime, some students in Manhattan got up early today hoping to share in the experience of the first blast-off of the space shuttle. Jane Hansen was with them.
The pictures that you are now seeing live from PAD every 9A.
For these 7th graders, class began rather early today, 6:30 a.m. But despite the hour, they were bright-eyed and looking forward to the launch. Many of them hope someday they'll be aboard a spacecraft.
I think that's the dream of everybody in this classroom. I think it's the ultimate.
Then came word of problems. The countdown halted for what was thought would be a couple of hours. The kids took it in stride. While they waited, they worked on their experiments. The school has reserved space on a future shuttle, probably in 1986, and will send up an experiment involving fruit flies. What do they hope to learn?
Our project is going to be having fruit flies being sent up into space and then having them bred to find out what they'll be like, how will they fly, and also we'll have different types of mutant flies, ones that don't have wings and can't fly, and see what their reaction will be.
Then came word that the mission was scrubbed for the day. The kids sat back down at their desks, and they talked about their disappointment.
I think probably a lot.
And then hit the brakes once the space shuttle's on the ground.
The designers at Grumman have more than a nodding acquaintance with computers that run amok. The designers use all these computer terminals to help solve confoundingly complicated problems. Maybe these computers decided to copy the ones on Columbia this morning because while we were here, all these computers conked out.
You're working along and they just sound out with a beep and that's it. They're gone.
The computers have just up and decided they're sick and they're going home for the day.
That's true. That's right. And that happens.
So the only thing that the guys at the Grumman Brain Trust could do was shake their fists at their computer and the one on the Columbia. One other thing they'll be doing, too, they all plan to be up at dawn Sunday for the next launch attempt. They figure after all this work, they don't want to miss that, Jim.
Well, when you live in a world of broken buses, late subways, commuter trains that don't run, crosstown traffic which crawls, it would be nice to be able to lift your eyes to the skies and forget about the problems of running the nation's biggest city.
The space shuttle? Can't they build anything in America that works on time?
It is probably a good thing that Grumman buses don't.
Right, Saturday at 7.
The Space Shuttle Columbia sits on a lonely launching pad this evening, bolted to the ground, deserted by the crowds that had come to witness its ascent into space. And as of now, no one knows when it will be launched.
This is NBC Nightly News with John Chancellor at the Kennedy Space Center and Roger Mudd in New York.
Was defeated today by a computer which wouldn't talk and wouldn't listen. After years of delay, the launch of the shuttle had to be postponed at Cape Canaveral to the frustration of about 1 million people who'd come here to watch, to hundreds of NASA technicians and officials, and to the bitter frustration of the 2 astronauts who spent 6 hours on their backs waiting for a signal to go which never came. The decision to postpone the launch until at least Sunday morning came 3.5 hours after the scheduled time for launch.
Fine. Let that come over this channel
The
then.
launch director, George Page, and Center Director Dick Smith have just announced that we will scrub the launch attempt for today. we will stop the clock probably at the T-minus 9-minute point and send out a crew to open the hatch of the orbiter and take the crew back to the astronaut quarters. The earliest time in which we could possibly reschedule the launch will be for Sunday morning at 6:50 a.m.
And so astronauts Robert L. Crippen, John W. Young, looking grim and angry, were taken out of the shuttle, and more than 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen were removed from a shuttle fuel tank. That tank has to dry out tomorrow, and it takes 48 hours to drain the fuel and put it back, which means the craft won't be ready until early Sunday. And if the computer link-up can't be fixed, it won't go then. A bad end to a day which began well. The astronauts were up early and ate a good breakfast. They worked their way into their spacesuits without trouble. The weather, which can be a problem here, was very good. And then, from launch control, the early hint of trouble.
And the problem with the backup computer may well be solved with the reprogramming of it. It's approximately a 7-minute operation, so the countdown stands at T-minus 9 minutes and holding.
And as everyone wondered how serious the problem was, launch control indicated that it might be very serious.
We're all agreed that the probability that this guy cleared up is not really that great. It might be that it will, but we're not heavily confident.
And when the decision was made, launch control apologized to the astronauts who had waited so long.
We're sorry that we had to spend a long time in the cockpit this morning, but I guess it's just one of those things. We're going to try harder on Sunday morning.
3 teams of experts are working on the computer problem tonight, 1 here at Cape Canaveral, 2 at the Houston Space Center, and if someone doesn't come up with an answer by tomorrow, there will be no space shuttle scheduled for Sunday morning. Here are 2 reports on the reluctant computer.
Computers tell the shuttle how to carry out almost every one of its tasks and maneuvers from launch to landing. If the computers don't work, the shuttle is in trouble. 4 main computers on board, all interconnected and talking to one another, do most of the work. They take in information like where the craft is, what its pitch and altitude are, and based on that, they issue the commands telling the spacecraft what to do. If during the flight this system of 4 main computers breaks down, a 5th computer takes over. The 5th computer isn't able to do everything the 4 main ones can. Its job is to keep the shuttle in orbit or land it safely. To stay prepared for a possible emergency, the 5th computer must constantly talk to the 4 main computers during the flight, so the 5th one knows what's going on. What the engineers discovered just before the launch time today was that the lines of communication from 2 of the 4 main computers to the 5th weren't working. That means the 5th computer, the backup, would not have understood enough of what was happening during the flight to take over if something went wrong with the 4 main ones. That created a dangerous situation which forced the cancellation of the launch. Robert Bazell, NBC News, Cape Canaveral.
The computers on the Columbia are located directly below the flight deck in cabinets of the crew quarters. It's an easy area to get into once the experts have figured out what's causing the problem. Experts by the dozen are working here in Houston and in California with astronauts in simulators and readouts from the spacecraft, trying to duplicate the conditions that forced postponement. Trouble is, they've never experienced this exact condition before in all the thousands of hours of simulation and of checking out the space shuttle computers. The spacecraft's entire control system works by computer, so this failure is embarrassing. The work is now the pacing factor. The launch of Columbia cannot be rescheduled until NASA has some answers. And Flight Director Neil Hutchinson says that gives them an arbitrary deadline if the flight's to get off.
I've come up with a documented case of this particular phenomenon.
Shortly after the decision to scrub, scientists froze the output of all 5 computers for a closer look at the evidence. The talk for the rest of the day was of systems and circuitry and software, technology that, in those final crucial minutes, failed. But it was 2 people, perched high atop a rocket for 7 hours, who hurt the worst. And it showed as they left the Columbia. Bob Crippen had said simply, no joy. John Young wore his disappointment on his face. But space veteran Alan Bean says they'll bounce back.
I don't think anything that happened today is going to hurt them. They know in this business that if you go right when you plan to, that's what you want to do and you hope to do, but if you do, you're lucky.
With this frozen reminder that today's launch was abandoned at T-20, the spectacle ended, and the wait began. The astronauts were not alone in their disappointment.
% of the exterior body panels, and a full 5-year no-rest-through warranty. Now with a 10...
It began long before sunrise, when it was clear that a spectacular day lay ahead for the first attempt at launching America's space shuttle. It all seemed to be going perfectly from the start. 2:30 a.m. After being awakened, astronauts John Young and Bob Crippen have their traditional steak and eggs breakfast, then a quick physical. 3:10 a.m. Suiting up after getting a final weather briefing. No problems anywhere. 3:50 a.m. They leave the crew quarters for pad 39. 4:30 a.m. They begin getting in the Columbia after final checks in the White Room. All this time, the countdown ticks away smoothly toward their 6:50 a.m. launch time. Then the troubles began.
The crew has had a small problem with the comparison of the backup program. That's a software program in the flight computers, and we'll be re-examining that during the 10-minute hold at the T-9-minute point.
But within minutes, Launch Control announced the problem had been solved. Then another failure. A bulky fuel cell, important because it supplies electricity for the Columbia and in the process, drinking water. Within minutes, a solution. But the computer problem returned. At Launch Control's orders, a fresh set of directions is fed into the computers. The computers, there are 4 primary and 1 backup, still didn't agree. The 5th or backup computer consistently disagreed with the solutions offered by the other 4 computers. Mission rules forbid takeoff, in fact, unless all 5 computers are working and in agreement, and they never did. A last attempt was made at reprogramming the computer while the inertial measurement unit, a system of gyros that guides the spacecraft through space, needed realigning. More time on the pad. The 2 astronauts had now been lying on their backs in their ejection seats for 6 hours. Just before 10 a.m., the scrub order came.
The launch director, George Page, and center director, Dick Smith, have just announced that we will scrub the launch attempt for today. We will stop the clock probably at the T-9-minute point and send out a crew to open the hatch of the orbiter and take the crew back to the astronaut quarters.
So they're not in space, but spending a few days more in Florida, sticking to the launch schedule, planning to go to bed early tonight and get up early tomorrow to fly the Shuttle trainer aircraft just as on the day before launch once again.
The Shuttle is the most sophisticated spacecraft ever built, a product of the computer age, computers capable of processing millions of operations per second. Here's how it works and what went wrong. 4 main computers control the Shuttle. They communicate with each other constantly. If one disagrees, the other 3 override it, as happened during this test landing of the orbiter. One computer said the orbiter was in the wrong position. The other 3 disagreed and turned the dissenting computer off. They were right, and the shuttle landed safely. The problem this time involves the 5th computer, a backup, which verifies information from the other 4. Today, when the 4 primary computers attempted to talk to the backup, it was at the wrong time, just 1/25 of a second too early, but that was enough to scrub today's launch. Today's situation was particularly baffling because unlike previous similar situations, when the astronauts attempted to reset the computers, surprisingly, it didn't work.
The computer came up and told us that it was not healthy.
It would be like, don't take a long trip without a spare tire?
That's basically right. Not the first trip.
Tonight, scientists here in Houston continue their extensive tests to determine what went wrong, whether it's a problem with the computers themselves or with the computer program, the so-called software.
Professional nail enamel you can use at home in 120 gorgeous colors. Shines like crazy, wears on and on.
For thinning or cuddling or little surprises. Revlon nail enamel, we've got your color.
I'm one of the girls who's one of the boys, enjoying the jokes and the smokes and the noise. I've layers of lacquer, a lady in rejoice.
Because she's one of the girls who is the woman of the year.
Lauren Bacall and Harry Gardino in Woman of the Year, the new musical comedy at the Palace Theater.
Listen to that!
Made in Japan, tomorrow night at 7.
The Space Shuttle, a $10 billion project delayed because one computer wouldn't give its okay. Our focus tonight, the crucial role that computers now play throughout our society. We'll look at today's problem at Cape Canaveral and how we all deal with computers. We'll talk live with one of the founders of the Apple Computer Company, which grew from a $1,300 investment to a $300 million business in 5 years. And we'll talk with a writer concerned about the impact of computers on our lives.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Good evening. They've found the problem in the computer system, the system that was meant to control the Columbia's mission into space. They've pinpointed the problem, but they haven't fixed it yet. And no one appears to be quite certain yet how long it will take to fix. So the mission could be launched by 10 to 7 Eastern Time Sunday morning. That, however, is the very earliest possible launch time. It still depends on straightening out the computers. There are people who know how to deal with computers. We'll be talking to a couple of them this evening. We'll be talking to them about the Space Shuttle in particular, and on a broader scale, about the way that computers seem to be insinuating their way into all of our lives in one guise or another. We all seem to need them these days, but the Columbia Space Shuttle quite literally can't function without them. Here's my colleague, Hugh Downs, in Houston.
Computers are absolutely necessary to fly a spacecraft like the shuttle. Nothing that is done aboard in the way of control directly controls the spacecraft. It's all done through computers. And in that way, it's the most sophisticated and most complex system that has been put into space yet. And I asked Edward Shevers, who is the Chief of Data Services here at the Johnson Space Flight Center, in what way these were the most complex.
Because of the 5 computers that we have, each of which is effectively equivalent to an airborne version of an IBM 360.
And it's the data from those 5 computers that NASA scientists today began analyzing, searching for the answer they need by midday tomorrow for a Sunday launch. A spacecraft like the shuttle is so dependent on computers that a complete malfunction would be an absolute nightmare.
Okay, pitch up. We're up. Got a mass alarm. Computer light. It's number 2.
A computer malfunction did occur on the first test flight of the Space Shuttle Enterprise. But because of the backup systems, computer number 2 was safely shut down and the mission proceeded.
Okay, she's flying good. 250, starting flare.
That's how the system is supposed to work. The 4 primary computers talk to each other, and if they think that one of their number is wrong, they will outvote and disconnect it. The backup computer listens, ready to take over if the primaries fail. This morning, none of the computers failed on the Columbia. The problem was more basic than that. They didn't talk to each other. 2 of the computers were sending signals to the backup computer too soon. The backup saw the mistake. 1/25th of a second later, when the backup expected that information, it didn't get it. In this computer system, 2 strikes and you're out. And the backup would not listen to those computers any longer. Thus, the system failed.
Unfortunately, I don't know a heck of a lot about the resolution to the problem. We tried a whole bunch of things this morning during the count in an attempt to resolve it, and were unsuccessful.
NASA scientists say they are making good progress isolating the problem, a problem that must be solved.
The computers fly the shuttle at all times, and the shuttle will not fly without the computers.
The space age created this era of high-speed computers, and high-speed computers are going to be necessary to all its future progress. We're right now coming to you live from inside the cockpit of a 1G trainer here at Johnson Space Center, and I'm again with Ed Shevers, who's a computer expert. And I want to ask, first off, if there's anything new, Ed, since that conference about what went wrong this morning.
Well, since this morning, the software, spacecraft software division and IBM have been analyzing the data that were taken from the computers. They do know basically how the computers failed. But what we don't know right now is why they failed.
What's the time frame now? Between now and tomorrow noon, that deadline, do you think it's likely that they'll be able to trace the difficulty and get it corrected?
Yes, what we're doing tonight is they are continuing the analysis to try and prove the theories that we have. And we are also running tests in the various labs here at the site. If the theories are held up and if the tests prove out what we think, then we see no reason why we cannot pick up the count probably tomorrow night and go for the Sunday launch.
Are you at all apprehensive about the possibility of any other problems that might crop up in the interim?
We don't know of any right now, but of course there could be some.
Everything seems to be okay otherwise.
Yes.
Right. What, are we overreaching ourselves? This is a philosophic question, but I wonder, are we getting too dependent on cybernetic devices? Might we abdicate our responsibility as humans, in other words, and work for the machines?
No, I don't think so. I believe the shuttle itself is so complex, and there is so many things going on that we need the computers to help the crew. The crew always has the capability to override what the computers do, but they still have to go through the computers to do anything.
In one way, it simplifies, because on this instrument panel, this screen, for example, each of these three screens probably represents what would be a myriad instruments if they had to each be set in, because they get readouts on here from the computers about various conditions,
yes,
don't they?
Yes.
Any word on how the astronauts feel, Crippen and Young, about this delay, or are their confidence still there?
Oh, I'm sure that they're as disappointed as the rest of us are, but they are test pilots and they are used to this kind of thing.
I think Gene Cernan said it best this morning. He said, "We've waited this long, we might as well wait a little longer and do it right."
That's true, yes.
Thank you, Ed Shevers. Back to you, Ted.
And thank you, Hugh Downs. In a moment, more on computers and what they do for and to the rest of us.
Here's two good friends. Tonight is kind of
Hey, whoa, camp's back there.
Guys, after 3 days of nothing but fish, I vote for a change of the menu. Tonight is our last night. It's my vote.
All right, so where are we going?
I know a guy down here that serves up a really good steak and a terrific Lowenbrow.
When you want the taste of a truly great American beer, tonight, let it be Lowenbrow.
You guys have any luck today? Not until now.
Let it be Lowenbrow.
That's very good thinking, young lady.
Hope they raised lots of money there today. And that's the early edition of News 4 New York on this Saturday evening.
NBC's Nightly News is next. You're invited to join Carol and me again tonight at 11. And until then, good evening.
Good night.
Presentation of News 4 New York.
Your live visits an 80-year-old artist and her self-portrait tonight at 7.
Sit down.
A decision to go for launch of the first space shuttle at 7 a.m. Sunday morning has been made by NASA's senior managers.
From New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Jessica Savage.
Good evening. Quote, I walked in here and I am going to walk out. With those words, the doors of George Washington University Hospital opened and President Reagan began his trip home to the White House. White House correspondent Bill Lynch reports.
It was a gray, wet day in Washington, much like the rainy Monday 13 days ago when Mr. Reagan and 3 others were shot and wounded. Security outside George Washington University Hospital was tight. After a series of x-rays at 7 a.m., doctors told the president he could go home. Dr. Dennis O'Leary.
The chest x-rays look better this morning, and in fact, what we saw yesterday probably also represented part of the resolution and recovery phase, but at that one point in time, we couldn't know until we got another 24 hours downstream.
When he left his third-floor suite at 10:30, Mr. Reagan had to follow hospital rules and ride a wheelchair to the elevator. But he walked through the lobby on his own, telling hospital workers he was sorry his unexpected arrival had disrupted their routine. Looking a bit pale and somewhat thinner, the president walked out with Mrs. Reagan and daughter Patty Davis to face the inevitable question.
How do you feel? How do you feel? Great. What are you going to do when you get home, Mr. President? What are you going to do when you get home?
Sit down.
Aides had chosen the limousine because its higher door made it easier for Mr. Reagan to get in and out. At the White House, staff members and their families waited in the rain to welcome their boss home. Mr. Reagan's smile told the story. Inside, the president said, "This looks like a nice place," and he got a welcoming kiss from Mary Bonner Baker, 3-year-old daughter of his chief of staff. The 70-year-old president will continue receiving medical attention here as he spends the next several weeks close to home on a limited work schedule. At some point, he's expected to return to the hospital to visit his press secretary, James Brady. Dr. O'Leary said today Brady has regained virtually 100% of his mental function and that his personality continues to evolve. Bill Lynch, NBC News, the White House.
It's take two for the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Its bulky computers reported in working order. Columbia's poised, ready to go shortly past dawn tomorrow. And everybody, according to the launch crew, is, quote, charged up and all ready to go. We have two reports. First, Roy Neal at the Houston Space Center.
The Space Shuttle computers are very complex, as you can see from the number of cables connecting test models here in Houston. So complex that even the experts who designed them now admit they made a mistake. What they thought was a problem with the backup computer has turned out to be an error in the way the 4 primary computers were programmed. Today they held a news conference to say that 2 of the main computers, when first turned on, sent signals that caused the backup computer to reject them. They called it a random failure that had never occurred during all the thousands of hours of checking out and rehearsing for this flight. They said it probably would have gone away if they'd turned off all the main computers and then turned them back on to start programming a second time. But they felt that turning off the control system of a spacecraft on the launch pad would have been too risky. And they suspected the backup computer anyway, not the 4 main ones. It was that confusion that caused a postponement. One of the experts, Arnold Aldrich, now says they've worked out a solution.
We know that if it occurs, we can detect it, and we can go back and retry and set the computer bank up at this minus 30-hour point in the countdown, and it will not occur again throughout the flight under all normal procedures.
Tonight, Mission Control here is working closely with Launch Control at the Cape, checking out the computers and all of the equipment aboard the Columbia, watching the weather, talking to ground tracking stations all over the world, hopeful of flying John Young and Robert Crippen tomorrow morning. Now with the story of what's going on at the Cape, here's Robert Bazell.
Early this evening, the countdown resumed. Throughout the night on the launch pad, workmen will be preparing the shuttle for a takeoff tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. With the computer problem solved, NASA officials say they know of no mechanical difficulties which could delay the launch.
The astronauts, John Young and Robert Crippen, went to bed at 4 p.m. this afternoon, and they're scheduled to be awakened at 2 a.m. tomorrow morning. While everything on the craft now seems to be okay, there could be a problem with the weather that could cause another delay.
At a news conference today, Launch Director George Page said the forecast for tomorrow morning predicts skies which may be too cloudy.
I doubt if there'll be any change in it. We'll pick up the count and go down and see what the weather's like when we get to launch time. Hopefully, we'll have a clear period at that time and be able to get it off. If not, we'll have to hold to see when it clears.
If the weather is bad in the morning, NASA officials say they'll be ready to try a third launch attempt on Monday or Tuesday. But right now, everyone around here is trying to get the shuttle off tomorrow morning. Robert Bazell, NBC News, Cape Canaveral.
Tomorrow, when and if the space shuttle is launched, it will be blasting off on the 20th anniversary of the first manned orbiting of the globe. That flight, if you'll remember, by Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin. NBC News will broadcast live coverage of tomorrow's launch beginning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. And we'll be back with more of today's news right after this.